So as we've seen lately, there's a lot of contention between some of the communications that have been going on in the ICO space. The SEC first off came out and they were extremely relaxed, and then as the later time came out, they started to focus a little bit more on the difficulties with what's known as a SAFT, that in for short, an anagram, simple agreement for future tokens. Now with that in mind, when they originally came out saying, oh yes, we support the blockchain community, there's a lot of miscommunication around what that actually meant, as the SEC lines of what a Howey test is are quite difficult to pass. So as we go on our way, we're going to take you through the journey of the SECs. Now, before we get started, one of the things we want to do is thank you all for joining us again on another quick journey. Remember to like, subscribe, share, leave your comments down below, and also keep in mind that this is not investment advice. This is strictly for information, education, and entertainment purposes only. The SEC has actually been calling companies up. This itself seems very abstract to me. The SEC, while sending out subpoenas, is actually calling up different ICOs, their advisors, and getting them to try to stop their ship before they even launch. This is very unlike the SEC, and in itself kind of just shows how maybe not only scared but confused these new market regulators are. Blockchain is something that's growing on a decentralized global basis, and the SEC really only has jurisdiction in the United States. This makes it difficult for them to operate anywhere else. That brings us to the next spot of this. Well, what is the Howey test? The Howey test was technically created by the Supreme Court and is used to determine whether transactions qualify as investment contracts. So this comes down to a substance over form idea, deciding how the Supreme Court actually looks at these tests as of an investment substance rather than its form. This is the determining factor to whether or not it's a security. Even if an investment is not labeled a stock or a bond, it may very well be security under the laws, meaning the registration disclosure requirements still apply. After the creation of the Howey test, some promoters masqueraded securities to try and escape the registration requirements, such as by calling an offer of the securities interest in a general partnership. To deal with these charades, courts took the economic realities behind an investment scheme rather than the name or its form to determine whether this is a security or not. If an investment opportunity is open to many people, and if investors have little to no control over the management of the investment or money or assets, then investment is probably a security. And on the other hand, if an investment is made available only to a few close friends or associates, and these investors have significant influence over how the investment is managed, then it is probably not a security. From Jay Clayton, the chairperson of the SEC. But apparently the modus operandi is pretty simple. The folks at the SEC are apparently just picking up their telephone to call people behind multiple individual ICOs. And believe it or not, the strategy has paid off. According to the key SEC official, over a dozen cryptocurrency-related companies have just abandoned their plans to raise funds from investors after they were contacted by the agency over telephone. This is a rather obscure way for the SEC to work. So for the uninitiated, the ICO, or the initial coin offering that enables blockchain companies to sell digital tokens that will inevitably redeem as services or goods, because it is possible to trade these tokens in a secondary market, SEC views them as securities and deploys appropriate mechanisms to oversee the function. This is why the SEC is convinced that a huge chunk of all the ICOs out there should sign up with the agency for legal reasons. Interestingly though, despite the SEC's reported warnings to investors, ICOs are still thriving today, which we're happy to see. And because of this, as I stated at the beginning of this idea, that I'm actually on the side where I don't like regulation and I don't like companies like the SEC having rule. I'm supporting critical thinking, and often sometimes critical thinking comes from a hard-learned failure. So if you put money into a scam because you did no due diligence, I consider that a lesson learned for you, not room for a regulatory body to come in and mess with everyone else. So although I do see why the governance has issued these types of demands and requirements of these tokens, I still think that the more blockchain companies that create tokens, the harder it will be to inevitably stop this global movement. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. The SEC can't keep up with how many new tokens are being created. If a simple phone call will get you off and stop you from doing the work that you did, well then you were probably going to get in trouble for it anyways. You don't need to go to jail for something stupid. So with this in mind, what I'm suggesting, and not suggesting anything at all, because again, remember, this is not advice for any particular idea. I want to trust a guy who does psychedelics on the side of the hill. With that in mind, what's important to remember is that this is a global movement, and it's a global movement away from centralized governance. If you want to win, pour on as many tokens as you can because it will be impossible for them to stop. This is Tio with the Arcane Bear. We just want to thank you one more time for joining us today on this interesting episode as we dive into some of the rules and regulations of the SEC. I know it's not our standard format, but we do like to play around, and it has been slow the last few days. Remember to like, give us those thumbs up, subscribe, comment, share all these videos with your friends and family. Remember to check out Arcane Bear on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Steam it, Google+, and all the rest. We're happy to join along the ride and the journey that we get to share today. See you guys on the other side.